Hey there, story lovers. Welcome to Wingman Joker, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating tales that will thrill, inspire, and entertain. If you enjoy the journey, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to join the adventure. Chapter 11, First Encounter. Aurelius tried his best to look scary as he peered into the narrow eyes of the thief. What's it to me? Does that matter? I'm just doing what's right. TCH. Without wasting a single second, the narrow-eyed man aimed a kick at Aurelius' head, forcing Aurelius to let go of the bag in order to block. The kick didn't come, however, and the man instead switched stances and kicked Aurelius in the stomach. Aurelius managed to block the blow with his arms, but despite his enhancement and reinforcement, he was launched back by the unprecedentedly powerful kick. Isn't he supposed to be just a thief? Aurelius thought as he recovered and gave chase to the man who had already gotten far. The young man had used the pipes in the alley to get around quicker, but Aurelius was worried about the durability of the pipes and didn't want to cause any issues, so he stayed low while running behind the thief. After making it through the packed alley, Aurelius and the thief found themselves in a kind of intersection of alleys. The thief jumped to the right, hopping from a pipe to the wall of the building a couple meters from the ground. He then hopped from one side of the wall to the other, getting higher with each jump. Aurelius wasn't going to let him get to the roof, however, and loaded up his legs before taking a leap, which led him within hand's reach of the thief. He then reached his hand out and tried grasping the thief, but got his own hand grabbed instead, as the thief managed to notice him and turn his body while airborne. The thief was about to kick him, but his plan of grabbing Aurelius backfired immediately as Aurelius grabbed him and held on tight as they plummeted to the ground. The thief's eyes went to Aurelius' hand and then to his eyes. Then Aurelius felt the thief's grip lose all strength. He stopped enhancement, Aurelius thought, not sure if he should be confused or impressed. They then fell onto the moist stone street, with the thief taking most of the impact since he was on the bottom. The thief's expression didn't change much at the impact, however. Aurelius now knew to be impressed. The thief realized the situation in an instant. He didn't try struggling pointlessly, and he shut off his enhancement, putting all his essence into reinforcement to avoid any real damage. Aurelius' slight respect for the thief then exploded as the thief's grip regained its strength, with no sign of setups. Motionless magic. Seeing the shock on Aurelius' face, the thief smiled widely enough for it to be seen through the mask and was quick to push Aurelius off of him. He then rolled backward before jumping to his feet and throwing. Aurelius was expecting the thief to run, but to his surprise, he threw the bag into a trash pile on the side and took an awkward-looking fighting stance. Fuck the bag, let's just fight. Aurelius tapped his forehead, and the blue in his eyes got deeper. He hadn't expected to need anything besides enhancement and reinforcement, but now he did. He entered a wide but centered stance from which he could quickly dash forward and suppressed a smile. Then the pair engaged, both dashing forward with their own strikes, but surprisingly, the thief's strikes had no power, as if every strike were a feint. Aurelius' strikes weren't really working either, as they were all either taken to highly durable areas by redirection or avoided completely. Aurelius instantly realized the battle was not going anywhere in this manner, so he stretched one of his steps, stepping his right leg in between the thief's legs, and tried grabbing the wrist of the thief in an attempt to make the fight more rough and less technical. As expected, the thief avoided it like the plague, but to the extent he did. It was certainly unexpected. The unexpected didn't stop there. Aurelius went to grab him by the throat with his other hand, extending himself even further. Right then, he was met with a furiously sharp counter in the form of the thief's right fist hooking right into his face. At the exact same moment, Aurelius sensed something from his fingertips. He couldn't linger on that feeling for long, though, as his consciousness jumped, and he fell to his side. My opponent extends, I contract. My opponent contracts, I extend, the thief said with a chuckle as he stood over Aurelius. Aurelius was still dazed and could just barely make out the words. He was mesmerized by something he saw. On the thief's neck were scratch marks. Then the thief loaded up a kick. Aurelius put his hand up to block the kick, which was aimed at his head. He just needed a bit of time to recover before he could get back to fighting. He didn't have to block anything, however, as in the next instant, the thief was engaged by Aurelius' trusty partner. Aurelius lowered his hands to see before it was over. Cade ducked the thief's first strike, and tried to grasp his wrist, but the thief was quick. The movement of his arms seemed almost unnaturally quick when compared to every other movement of his. Cade noticed this and adapted. She switched her stance, kicked the thief's front leg in a way that forced his stance to widen, and in the split second, the thief's was put into an unnatural position for him where his movements couldn't rely on familiarity. Kate twisted her body, delivering a swift blow to the thief's chin. The thief's eyes rolled back, as he limply turned according to the momentum of the blow, and the movement that happened next as the thief fell to the ground could best be described as him folding in two. Kate averted her attention from the thief and looked down at Aurelius with disapproval. "Don't just throw your bag in my face and rush off." Then she revealed a slight smile and offered Aurelius a hand. "And if you do, don't get your ass beat right after. It makes you look embarrassing." Aurelius closed his eyes and shook his head before grinning sheepishly. "Sorry about that, but this guy was special," Aurelius said as he took Cade's hand and pulled himself up. Cade glanced at the unconscious thief lying with his face in a dirty puddle, then looked back at Aurelius. "Doesn't seem very special to me." "He did motionless magic," Aurelius said with a deeper tone than usual. Cade frowned. "Seriously?" Aurelius nodded. "Well, he did beat you, so he's obviously strong, and his hand movements were quick. He seemed to have decent combat experience as well," Cade said as she walked over to the thief and turned him around. "But let's see." She pulled the mask off the thief's face. Immediately afterward, she frowned and turned to Aurelius. "Are you sure? Motionless magic? This guy is about your age. Maybe younger. And he's a petty thief. Although he's clearly an overqualified one, I don't know if he would have the opportunity to learn motionless magic." Aurelius tilted his head. "Well, he didn't use any setups. Is it possible that he's self-taught?" Cade sighed. "No, there's no way." Aurelius shrugged. "Well, I'll go return the bag." "What about this guy?" Cade asked. "Are we going to deliver him to the authorities?" Aurelius took the bag and headed back. "Let me think about it." He then sprinted back to the intersection with the bag in hand before turning to the pipe-filled dumpster alley and maneuvering his way through it. Those scratches. He turned his reinforcement off completely to maximize his power. Either the amount of essence he can control at once is minuscule by nature, or he just wanted to get all the power behind his punch. He couldn't decided to say goodbye to reinforcement because he was so confident, Aurelius thought, figuring out the depth of his observations with his head now clear enough to think. So, in order to maximize his battle prowess, he turns different usages on and off depending on when exactly he needs them. Awesome, he thought with a smile, but then his face dropped as he realized something. What if he wasn't doing motionless magic? The scratches weren't bleeding. Oh, why didn't I think of that before? Jumbled thoughts flew around Aurelius' head. He didn't have any more time to think about that just then, as he reached the place where the owner of the purse still was. The man she was with was currently curled up, apparently still suffering from the kick he had endured earlier. It seemed he hadn't used reinforcement and had received an enhanced kick, so it was no wonder he would be in pain for a long while. The man suddenly regained his vigor once he saw Aurelius with the bag in his hand. He postured himself properly and walked up to Aurelius with an intention Aurelius couldn't quite figure out. "Give the..." Aurelius looked down into the man's eyes with a friendly smile. "Oh, you're shorter than you look from afar." The man was left speechless, and Aurelius quickly walked past him to the woman behind him. "I think this is yours," Aurelius said, extending the hand holding the bag towards the woman. The woman smiled and took the bag before covering her mouth and saying with a light laugh, "It certainly is." The woman curtsied. "Thank you for getting it back to me." Aurelius smiled. "No problem, I'm always happy to help." The woman raised her brows and said with a tilt of her head, "Ah, did you, by any chance, manage to apprehend the thief?" Aurelius paused for a while, and then scratched the back of his head and looked at his feet. "I'm sorry, he got away." Chapter 12. Recruitment. Balgair's weary eyes drifted open as his head swayed to the side, the back of his head rubbing against the thick concrete pole. What then greeted him were heavy, cold winds, the sounds of waves crashing against the platform they were on, the darkness of evening, and dark clouds only letting slivers of light pass and illuminate the figures of the boy-looking girl who was sitting down, watching him, and Goldilocks, who was standing up and looking towards the sea. He looked down at the wire that squeezed him against the pole. "Don't even think about it," the boy-looking girl said. "TCH. Hyperwire." Balgair raised his head. "Who the fuck are you?" Goldilocks turned around and looked down at Balgair with the same non-intimidating gaze he had earlier. "I'm Aurelius. She's Cade." Balgair raised his brows and tilted his head, his annoyance radiating through his gaze. "I didn't mean your names, dumbass. I meant, what organization are you part of? Why are you sticking your nose in my business?" Then the boy-looking girl named Cade butted in, "Dumbass. What does the guy tied to a concrete pole at a dock have to say about someone else's intelligence? Balgair snorted. Fuck you, I'm not in this shit because of intelligence. Also, off topic, why do you look like that if you're a girl? Haven't you considered letting your hair grow, not ripping out your eyelashes, and wearing some tighter clothes? Then you'd maybe actually get someone to want your ass. Kate jumped up to her feet like her weight was that of a feather and walked a bit closer before shoving the bottom of her shoe onto Balgair's left cheek. You know, I don't really want anyone to want my ass, but I get where you're coming from. Projecting desires onto others is a common habit of less developed people, after all. Balgair shook his head violently to get the dirty shoe out of his face. But it had no real effect except to make Cade push his face harder. Then she continued talking, and how do you suppose this doesn't have anything to do with intelligence? You're the dumbass going around stealing in broad daylight. You seriously never expected any trouble to come your way. Your type of weaklings should just stay inside and work some regular old job before they die. Hey, Cade, stop that, Goldilocks said from the side, putting a hand up but not moving an inch. Balgair gave up trying to shake his head and tried kicking the Cade's single grounded foot from under him, which managed to get the girl to back away. He then wiped his cheek on his shoulder before spitting on the ground as the two individuals looked at him unpleasantly. What's your partner's deal? Is he mentally challenged or something? Balgair switched his target from Cade to Aurelius. Why did you chase me when you had nothing to do with the matter? And why haven't you turned me in if you're not gonna kill me? Cade tilted her chin up and crossed her arms. And before Aurelius could open his mouth, she answered, he's not mentally challenged. A little unsophisticated, yes, but not unintelligent in the least. You see, he was the one who figured out your trick. What trick? Balgair asked. Aurelius showed a slight smile. You can't actually do motionless magic. You're a fraud, but a very skilled one. I actually didn't think of that myself, and I'm not sure how. I thought I had mastered the basics, but you really opened my eyes there, he explained, gesturing with his hands in an erratic manner. Yup, he's nuts, Balgair thought as he looked into those pair of frantic eyes that were directed straight at him. They were the eyes of a child. Or maybe more like those of an annoyingly curious baby that simply couldn't stop staring at you like you were some kind of alien creature. The fact that you're able to make do with your low affinity by simply having a constant supply you can manipulate as naturally as you breathe is just amazing. I mean, lowering one supply as you heighten another based on situational predictions in battle is super special. Balgair's eyes widened as he saw the ability he had mastered with years of work, figured out by someone the same age as him after sharing one brief encounter. That's right, I was right, Aurelius said, turning to Cade and pointing at Balgair whose surprised look told the story. It seems so, Cade said with a tilt of her head. Balgair sighed. Fine, he's not stupid. But can you tell me what you want now? I hope you didn't bring me here just to confirm my technique before handing me over to the authorities or killing me and throwing my body into the sea. The ends of Cade's lips curled up a bit. I would normally have opted for the latter option, but my partner here has other plans. Like what? Aurelius opened his mouth. I want you to help us with something, he said, a serious expression on his face for once. I want to make Mercrest better. To help the people and get rid of injustice. So, what do you intend to do? Well, me and Cade had the idea of a heist in mind. From there, we can use the funds to help the underprivileged and affect the political landscape of Mercrest. It's a democracy, right? So all we have to do is shape the conditions of the next election so that we can remove corruption and steer the country toward a brighter future. Silence followed Aurelius' speech. Then Balgair burst into laughter. What the hell are you on? Did you come up with that plan all on your own? You lost to me in a fight. There's no way you can actually have an effect on a whole country. Especially when there's a crime organization like Newman around. Cade nodded with a slow blink in acknowledgement. Newman is certainly a problem. However, there are still measures we can take to have an effect. Like what? It's Newman. They control almost everything, and the almost is there only because of the people they just straight up murk with barely any reason. They have branches all over the country that have the military power of the wealthiest houses around. We try to mess with them, and we are dead. You've seen the newspapers about that governor's family, right? They nailed them to the courthouse's wall by the backs of their mouths. Balgair gritted his teeth, and his face crumpled up as he put his words together like he was lifting bricks. They did that to even his children. And you wanna go after them? What the hell is wrong with you? Aurelius looked at Cade nervously. Cade looked back at him briefly, but her face hadn't changed a bit. I know what type of people they are. That's why I'm doing this. You'll get yourself and everybody you love killed, Balgair said with a low voice. It wasn't a threat or anything that carried bad intentions. They were honest words of prediction. I love nobody. My life is all I am putting at stake, and it is for a cause I am ready to die for. Why do I care? Balgair shook his head. You're just a crazy motherfucker trying to die in a heroic way. Not like you can actually do anything to change the world. Is that what you think? Kate asked as she walked to the side, where 2 duffel bags were, before pulling out a box and revealing a set of vials filled with black liquid. Just last week, we were in the Thropes handling a mission, and this is what we came out with. All without a single scratch on either one of us. Balgair furrowed his brows. Enhancers. The 2 of you killed a cursed beast. And without injuries. Ridiculous. Kate put the vials back and began walking towards Balgair. Oh, that's right, you wouldn't be aware of what we're capable of yet. Balgair watched with no real expectation but almost forgot to breathe once blue streaks began coalescing into the center of Cade's palm, replacing the faint illumination in the area with an unnatural, unstable blue luminescence. And as she walked closer, the mass of essence grew larger and larger, even though its mass seemed to be condensed as much as possible. Balgair kept a calm, unimpressed look as she approached, but it was really the first time he had seen essence handled so naturally. And it was all motionless. Balgair had simply heard of motionless magic before, and that had been from the individuals with the highest status he knew. He had separated from those people a long time ago and discarded their talk as simple myths after having tried to practice motionless magic for months to no avail. But now it was in front of him. He couldn't deny that the mass of essence was fake as it was right in his face. The streaks started to look more and more like lightning as Cade got closer, and the mass kept growing. Balgair could no longer remain calm. His sense of safety was crumbling as logic no longer mattered when that mass, which now seemed just barely controllable, approached. Do you understand it now? Cade asked. Balgair tried backing away by leaning to the side and trying to frantically push himself back with his feet. Answer, Cade said. Say it. Balgair stared at the mass that had grown to the size of a human head. It was probably the most beautiful thing he had seen in his entire life, but his mind could not process the unbelievable masterpiece that was shoved in his face, as it was too consumed by the fact that any moment, that beauty could spread off and explode his being completely out of existence. Finally, he gave in. Stop, I understand. The streaks died down, and the mass faded from existence, leaving only Cade's dark figure standing over Balgair, who was drenched in cold sweat. Well, Cade asked, will you join us? Aurelius wants to know more about your technique, and you're obviously ridiculously overqualified for a petty thievery. I'm not particularly interested in whatever story you have, but I know that if someone in the underworld has your fighting skills, he is bound to have a lot of experience that translates into connections and knowledge. Now, we're in need of those connections and knowledge, so it's your lucky day. You'll get a 5% cut of the heist profit, and you can go on your own path from there. You won't have to get involved with big, scary Newman if you're too afraid. Balgair did his best to slow his breathing before gulping. Before I answer, I want to know you. I don't do business with strangers. Let's start with origin. Your partner looks like a Zalfarian royal, but since you're so desperate for funds, he's got to be banished or something, right? I'm not from the great Zalfarian Empire, Aurelius said from the side, pointing at himself. Balgair's gaze turned to him with wide eyes. You're not. Aurelius tilted his head. No, I've lived in the Thropes my whole life, he said slowly, processing all the new information as he spoke. Balgair chuckled lightly to himself as some shivers went down his spine. Goldilocks, how old are you exactly? Ah, I'm 16 years old, Aurelius answered nonchalantly. Why do you want to know? Random pieces of information Balgair had picked up throughout his studies connected and formed a picture that brought an unintentional smile to Balgair's face. He glanced at Cade, whose inquisitive expression answered Balgair's question. She doesn't know, he thought. What is it? Cade asked. Balgair looked down for a while and collected himself before gazing back at Cade with a neutral expression. Ah, nothing, I've made my decision, I'll join you. Chapter 13, Heist Plans. This place, Cade asked as she looked around the shabby, mostly empty pub Balgair led them to. Really, Snake Eyes? Yes, this place. And call me by my name. Snake Eyes is a poor nickname, anyway, Balgair answered as he led Cade and Aurelius to an empty table, amateurishly crafted from differently colored wooden planks. Well, Balgair is a poor name as well. Pick your poison, Cade said as she sat on one side of the table with Aurelius, Balgair sitting opposite them. Aurelius raised his hand. I think your name is just fine, Balgair. Balgair sighed and shook his head before ordering a drink. So, how about you introduce yourself now, boy-looking girl? I happen to be quite curious as to how thou reached the ultimate status of boy-looking girl. Kate stared at Balgair with dead eyes. You know you're not funny, right? Well, he's laughing. Balgair pointed at Aurelius. Kate looked to her side, where Aurelius was, his shoulders shaking as he sniveled with his eyes closed, mouth open, and head leaned back. How did he? Well, it's already midnight, and we haven't slept in over 24 hours. I guess it's good for him to rest up a bit, Kate thought. Then she looked back at Balgair. He's asleep, dumbass. Balgair put his palm on his mouth and gasped. Really? I thought looking dumb as hell was just his natural state of being. Kate rubbed her forehead. You know, I don't really get why he wanted you to join us. You may be a decent combatant, and you may possess a peculiar technique, but I doubt you have enough brain cells to teach it to anyone. Balgair leaned back and kicked his legs out under the table. Then why did you take me in? Are you just incapable of saying no to your naive little boyfriend? Kate crossed her hands and snorted. I said I doubted your teaching ability. I don't outright disbelieve in it. What I'm saying is that I'm giving you a chance. Help us and teach Aurelius, and you can stay as a member of our team. Ha, you think I want to stay with you that bad? Balgair asked as if genuinely amused by such a thing. What if I just walk? Oh, you won't walk. If you try getting away, I'll kill you, Kate stated, like it made no difference. Balgair maintained his amused smile and chuckled a bit, but Kate could see him shudder slightly. Then Balgair raised his hands. Okay, I'll teach your boyfriend. But would you mind telling me why you're with him? I mean, look at the guy, he said, pointing at Aurelius' sleeping figure. Kate dug at her teeth with her tongue as she thought of an answer. Then, with her brows slightly raised in an indifferent tone, she said, Aurelius is special. I've never really met anyone who views essence like he does. It's life for him, and I believe he'll become one of the strongest ever. One of the strongest. Balgair said this with pure shock on his face, looking like he would burst out in laughter any moment. He couldn't beat me. Kate scratched her head a bit. He's inexperienced, but he's a quick learner. Fight him when he wakes up, and you'll lose, she said before putting her forearms on the table. He also has a kind of instinct. I'm not sure how to explain it, but he's capable of great things when it matters most. Balgair put his hands on his head with an exaggerated frown. You sure it's not just because he's attractive? I wouldn't blame you. The dude looks like a prince. Kate sighed and pointed at Balgair. You should shut up about that before I crush all your teeth. She then leaned back and crossed her arms again. Besides, I'm not fit for relationships. People around me tend to die a lot, she continued, glancing briefly at Aurelius. Ray is just a companion, and he has enough potential to be a permanent one. Or so I hope. People around you tend to die a lot. Could you be a little more dramatic? Kate put her palms on the table and looked into Balgair's sly eyes. Tell me your story. After that, I'll think about what to make of what just came out of your mouth. You know, death threats kinda lose their kick when they're overused, Balgair said as he dug his ear with his pinky finger. But whatever. My story isn't really remarkable. I was born without mommy and daddy, rolled with some criminal organizations for a while, and now I steal the purses of young women to buy cigarettes while I wait to die. Kate leaned her cheek against her fist. Sounds about right. Yup, ain't life just great? Balgair said before turning to the counter. Hey, Jason, where the fuck is my drink? I asked for it minutes ago. The bartender with a bald head and a goatee pointed to the counter in front of him, where a rose-colored glass stood. Come and get it, Fox. There's no table service at these hours. Kate was surprised to see Balgair obey the bartender and actually go get the drink. She got even more intrigued when the bartender pulled Balgair closer and whispered something. Then Balgair whispered something back, and the bartender looked a little surprised before nodding. Kate didn't bother to enhance her senses and just asked Balgair when he came back to the table, what did he whisper to you? Just some racist shit. Apparently, no whites are allowed here. They tend to be loud and start fights, Balgair answered. I just told him that Goldilocks is from Zalfari. People here tend to generalize all whites as people from the Thropes. Kate widened her eyes with interest in the conversation. Oh, I think the stereotypes about people from the Thropes are exaggerated. People there are actually quite courteous and fairly intelligent. Well, it is what it is. If you really want to help, go tell them to teach proper manners to the ones visiting outside countries and help them with some technological advancements. It's about time they stop being so stubborn and forget their little villages. Well, can you blame them for being stubborn and adamant in their way of living? People from Mercrest and Arcrick have done nothing but try to conquer them. If they had accepted all their gifts of technology, their cultures and societies would have been consumed already. Yeah, I know my history. You don't have to preach all the things you've heard on your travels to me. It would actually do you some good to pick up a book. I think you'd learn something very interesting, Valgair said with a smug look in his narrow eyes before taking a sip of his drink. Cade scoffed and slapped Aurelius on the arm. Hey, wake up, we're about to talk business. Aurelius shut his mouth and returned his head to its normal position before looking around frantically. What is it? Focus. We're going to discuss something, and then you'll get to sleep in a real bed. Aurelius rubbed his face with his palms before shaking his head and then starting to listen. So, about the heist, Cade said. We were thinking of a really wealthy house with a past of corruption but not much military power. Valgair put his elbows on the table and interlocked his fingers. There are really none of such houses that don't have ties with Newman. And I would rather you just kill me than be hunted by them for the rest of my life. Are you sure? I also don't want to get involved with Newman, so if there's a house that does meet those requirements, it's our best choice. But why do they have to be really wealthy? Why not just wealthy? That's enough for your purposes, right? Well, Aurelius thought it would be best if we didn't completely bankrupt our target. I have no opinion on the matter. Aurelius nodded proudly at the introduction of his requirement. Valgair rubbed his forehead and let out an exasperated sigh. Well, there's the Venom House, which meets the requirements of being really wealthy, corrupt, and not affiliated with Newman. But they have the most military power of any single house. So no to that, Valgair said. Then there's the Borlo House, which meets every requirement except for really wealthy. That house is dying, and Newman doesn't really care for it, so we can go in and take everything with little to no consequences. I suggest we do so. House Borlo it is, Cade decided. But wait, we'll bankrupt them. Valgair leaned in closer and peered into Aurelius' eyes. I get that you're an idiot, but please start trying your best to be less of an idiot because it's really getting on my nerves. The Borlos are corrupt, they deserve what's coming for them. And besides, after we're through with them, they'll be able to afford good lives. Aurelius pursed his lips and sat back. Fine, Aurelius said, standing up with a sigh. Now, where can I find that bed you were talking about? Chapter 14. Ruler of Mercrest. In a square-shaped garden located in the midst of a large castle, a woman with short, black hair clothed in a pure white dress was tending to the plants as a guest in stylish, black trousers and a loose shirt with thin, crimson markings on it entered. The guest looked around, his golden earrings with diamonds hanging off of them swaying in the process. Some strands of his auburn hair also came loose, so he slicked it back, leaving only a few strands alone, inexplicably. As he looked around with his light, sliver eyes, he wasn't surprised to notice the floors overlooking the garden were filled with soldiers. He walked over to the middle of the garden, where there was a small tree that cast a shadow on a pristine white bench. Then he turned and sat down, the woman in the white dress behind him. You came alone? The woman asked. The man spread his arms onto the backrest of the bench before leaning his head as far back as he could and watching the woman's upside-down figure with a smile on his face. It seems so, doesn't it? I have heard you were a cautious man. I'm also inclined to believe so, as you were able to overtake a dear friend of mine, the woman said, stopping her work to look at the smiling man in the eyes. So tell me, are you the man I was supposed to meet? Are you the real ruler of Mercrest, as they say? You look far too young. I also imagined you to be taller. The man returned his head to its original position and then looked at the ground in front, where clear water flowed in between plants. Don't worry, I'm real. As real as can get, the man said, standing up and bent over before ripping off the head of one of the plants. He then turned to the lady in white and bowed slightly, gesturing the dark violet plant at her. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Venom, he said with his head lowered before shifting his gaze toward the lady with only the movement of his eyes as a charming grin appeared on his face. You may call me Gadriel. Mrs. Venom walked forward with her shoulders back and took the plant out of his hands with a tight rapidness in her movement. These are poisonous, she said as she looked at the plant before throwing it away. Gadriel stood up straight and flicked his wrist. Oh, you don't have to worry about me, he said and began walking around the garden with long, slow steps. You think yourself invincible. I was told that you're not especially strong, Mrs. Venom said from behind. I'm fairly strong, but I wouldn't call myself invincible, Gadriel answered without looking back. I know my limits. Is not being able to arrive in time one of your limits? You're almost an hour late. Gadriel stopped shortly and turned to respond to the bitter lady's question. Not really, no, I came late on purpose. You ministers are all so self-absorbed and arrogant that I like giving you a reminder of your true worth once in a while. You think you'll get away with such behavior forever? Mrs. Venom asked with a judgmental look in her shady eyes. You think you're in a position to do anything to me? Gadriel asked and waited for a response, but the bitter lady just stood there, looking, well, bitter. Poisonous, one might say. That actually ties into the main topic of our little meeting, Gadriel said, raising a finger and then pointing it at Mrs. Venom. You're out of line. How so? Mrs. Venom asked, feigning obliviousness. Gadriel turned and began to walk around the garden with those long, slow steps of his. Oh, you know. You've known for a while now. I'm not your dear friend. I'm a man who consumes all I want, and I do it by all means. And what I want for the time being is to grab every nook and cranny of Mercrest. That means I'm going to place a Newman branch in Venelia as well. You are going to do no such thing as long as I live, Mrs. Venom said firmly. The tree was between the two of them at the moment, but Gadriel could visualize what her eyes must have looked like the moment she uttered those words. He just didn't care. If that is so, then I will take your life, he said, taking a peek from behind the tree at Mrs. Venom, who was staring right at him. I don't think it'll have to come to that, however. Issuing threats while standing in the midst of hundreds of soldiers. You must really believe in the air of invincibility you carry. However, I've seen your type crumble many times before, Mrs. Venom said, not a hint of fear in her eyes. Gadriel put his hands behind his back and smiled, squinting his eyes in an exaggerated manner. There is no, my type. I am alone. The sooner you realize that, the better. Really? Then tell me, Mrs. Venom said, raising her hand, ready to snap her fingers. What do you suppose stops me from doing tea, Mrs. Venom suddenly stopped as a thin blade extended from the two fingers of an uninvited guest lightly touched her throat. I do, a feminine voice came from behind the pure white mask, the individual worse with a black cloak. Gadriel looked around with amusement as the soldiers on the upper floors panicked and orders were yelled out. Mrs. Venom slowly shifted her gaze to the side, keeping the rest of her body completely still. Purple hair. Yes, I'm your dear friend's former guard, the masked woman said, tilting her head to the side. I switched my employer. Do you have something against that? I don't, but it was to my understanding that you were killed, Mrs. Venom said, looking at Gadriel. Killed by him. The masked woman chuckled slightly. That's enough, Sheridan, you can retract your blade, Gadriel said as he maintained eye contact with Mrs. Venom. Sheridan stepped back, letting her blade disappear. Mrs. Venom understood Gadriel's intent and raised a hand, motioning the soldiers to return to their positions. I apologize for my curiosity, Mrs. Venom said with a bow of her head. I won't doubt you again. Good, but I didn't come here to get respect. I came here to tell you to stop resisting my expansion, Gadriel said, his smile fading quickly as his tone got lower. You say that as if I'm going against natural law, Mrs. Venom spit out with a frown. But Venelia has the lowest crime rates out of all the cities in Newman, of which the rest are under the control of your underlings. That may be true, but the crime is not organized. It is composed of sudden happenings rather than calculated events, Gadriel explained. And you're an underling of mine, as well. You'll come to find that out eventually. Mrs. Venom scoffed. Calculated events. You think organized crime is somehow more moral than non-organized crime. Oh, but you don't care about morality, do you? You build orphanages one day and burn whole towns down the next. There was something in Mrs. Venom's eyes. She looked at Gadriel like one might look at a wild animal. It was slightly unpleasant, but not worth bringing up. You're quite right. I'm not concerned with morality. What makes organized crime superior, though, is the order found in chaos. It is predictably unpredictable, much like me, some may say. Crime is unpredictably unpredictable, then. I see no sense in what you say. A very rare few do. I've come to find out in this short life of mine, Gadriel said and turned his gaze to the beautiful little plants all around. You see, crime is the purest expression of human nature, and it is a fool's errand to try to prevent it without truly understanding. The real solution is to grasp it and make use of it. To control something of a fundamentally rebellious nature is a great feat, but it is one that leads to ultimate balance. You really are a rare breed of man, Mrs. Venenum said with something of a small laugh. I suppose it's best to end our meeting here. I will consider your proposal, and from then on, we will see what happens. Gadriel looked back at Mrs. Venenum and shut his lips, smiling a gentle little smile with a small tilt of his head. I agree. Let us end this here. It was interesting speaking with you. Mrs. Venenum raised her brows. Interesting. That is how I describe pleasant things. Be honored, Gadriel said and turned to leave. Sheridan walked by his side, synchronizing her steps with his, as she often liked to do. As they were just a few steps from the entrance, Gadriel turned around. He then spoke with an unprecedentedly low tone that left no space for doubt about the seriousness of his speech. I think it'd be best to inform you before I go, I'm only giving you time to think as a gesture. Do not delude yourself too much into thinking you actually have a pair of rational, functioning choices. If you resist me, you are dooming yourself. I will wipe your bloodline off the face of the planet. Mrs. Venenum didn't seem intimidated. She was a good actor. You should also know that the order within your organized crime is just an illusion. One day, it will escape your control and reduce Mercrest to nothing but ash. You're exaggerating. Gadriel turned and disappeared into the dimly lit entrance, leaving only some choice words behind, though that would be an interesting sight. Chapter 15. Respect. The bell of the pawn shop rang as Cade pushed the door open and entered on her lonesome. She had replaced the mercenary clothes with a thin black trench coat that almost reached her knees and a pair of fitting trousers. She looked toward the shy teenage boy with black hair behind the counter. Get Jimmy. The boy flinched and turned to go into the back room. Not long after, a thick man with a beard that covered his throat came from the back room. He rubbed his eyes before putting on his monocle. Well, if it isn't Cade. How are you? Not here to cure your loneliness, Cade said as she took out the box from her bag and put it on the table. There's 4.5 there. Give me my money. A half. Jimmy's upper lip curled. What do you want me to do with a half? Shove it up my ass. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Cade said with a scoff. Just give me the money for the 4. I'll take 25 gold for the half. You can make it into a mixed enhancer and sell it to some cheap prick. 25 gold. You drank the other half yourself and got some brain damage, huh? I'll give you 10 gold for it, max. And that's being generous when my trouble is taken into account. Fine, 10 gold, but if you take off 2% of your cut on our future deals. Deal, Jimmy said with a snobbish smirk. He then took the box and went into the back room, returning with a stack of banknotes. Here, you go. 100 gold for each, 10 for the half, 410 gold. My cut is 7%. That's 410 minus 28, 7, 381, 381 gold and 3 silver. You happy? Cade grabbed the stack of banknotes and flipped through them. All at separate banks, not a single one more than 10 gold. As always, Jimmy said, putting his hands in his pockets and sighed as Cade stuffed the banknotes into a pocket and turned. I'd say it was a pleasure working with you, but it never is. A real pain you are. Cade stopped but didn't turn. Your client is happy, and you're richer than yesterday, so how about you quit moaning about having to go through some banking troubles and do some good with that money of yours? Maybe it'll make you a half-decent man again if you spend it on something other than yourself for once. Oh, I should be a hero like you, huh? TCH, what happened to those mercenaries I got to help you, by the way? They don't exist anymore, Cade said, stretching her neck a little. Should have known, you cold bastard. Jimmy's voice was hoarse. Perhaps the leader of the mercenaries had more than just a connection, like he said. Well, goodbye for now, Jimmy, Cade said, waving with the back of his hand before pushing the door open and entering the street, accompanied by the sound of the bell. Can you put that out? It smells bad, Aurelius asked Balgar, who was sitting a couple meters from him with his head raised. Blowing smoke at the roof. I can, but I won't, Balgar answered with a dead look in his eyes. Ah, okay, Aurelius said and shifted his focus. Does this thing have to have this many pockets? He asked, checking all the various pockets on the tight black jacket. I don't know about your pockets. Just pick something you wanna wear and let's get out of here. But I just want to wear my old clothes. I don't need new clothes. For God's sake, Cade left like an hour ago. Let's have this sorted before that bitch gets back. Don't wanna hear both of you whining at the same time, Balgar said and stood up to stretch his legs a bit. Aurelius frowned. Don't call her that. Balgair met Aurelius' eyes and stayed still for a moment before raising his hands. Okay, fine, I'll go get you some clothes real quick. Be ready to like them because I will go jump off a cliff if I have to be in this place for any longer than 10 more minutes. Balgair left the changing room and returned not even half a minute later with a full set of clothes. There, he threw them into Aurelius' lap. Aurelius changed in a hurry. He believed what Balgair said about jumping off a cliff. Aurelius moved around a bit. Wow, these are nice. Balgair sighed with the slightest hint of a smile on his face. They look fine. The clothes consisted of a tight, long-sleeved, black undershirt that would have made Aurelius' abdominal muscles and obliques visible if not for the vest that went around his traps and waist. The vest was tight and felt protective, but still allowed nimble movement. His pants, on the other hand, were stretchy, fairly thin, and loose, needing to be tied around the waist with a white ribbon. How did you come up with these? Aurelius asked with his mouth wide as he looked at himself in the large mirror and moved around. Balgair took the cigarette out of his mouth and smiled. Just looked around for the most expensive stuff that I could afford with the money Cade gave me. Didn't wanna give back a single piece of bronze. Aurelius breathed a sigh. He would have liked to take another set of clothes, but these were good. And the budget was Cade's choice, so it was fine. Let's go with these, he said. I'll get multiple sets. Cade jumped down from the beginning of the bridge onto the space below and turned to see her shocked partners. She tilted her head and nodded. Nice clothes, Aurelius. Thought you would have gone with something more colorful, though. Her gaze then went to the unfamiliar bag on his shoulder. A new bag also, huh? High quality, too. Didn't know you like to spend. He doesn't. I do. Balgair butted into the conversation with a smirk. No change, by the way. Cade shifted her attention to Balgair, her eyes narrowing. I assumed so. She paused and then continued on to other matters. Well, I have some more business to attend to before the heist. I'd prefer it if Aurelius came with me, but you could maybe do some more research on House Borlo. Make sure they're not associated with Newman and come up with a plan. I don't think we'll need much, but in case the need for equipment rises, set the budget at 100 gold. I won't pay for anything needless, though. Balgair and Aurelius approached Cade as she spoke, and by the time she was done, they were within hand's reach. Balgair blew some smoke before putting the cigarette back in his mouth and extending his hand. You got banknotes. A smack resounded, and the cigarette flew out of Balgair's mouth. Aurelius flinched in surprise as Balgair seemed to turn and almost fold in two before he bounced back with rage in his eyes. What the fuck? Cade snorted. Oh, I assumed you'd know not to smoke in my presence. Even smokers should know that cigarettes smell like shit, so are you actually surprised? She turned to Aurelius and pointed to Balgair. You really put up with this? Grow a backbone. Balgair pumped his fist, but after Cade looked back at him, her eyes asked a mocking question. His twitched before he let out a sigh. Cade tapped Aurelius on the back and turned. Present me the budget, Balgair, and I'll pay for it then if I deem it necessary. We'll see here in 5 days' time. Go commit your slow suicide somewhere else with those cigarettes of yours, she said as he and Aurelius left Balgair behind. Aurelius looked at Cade with pursed lips. Did you have to do that? Do what? Give him a smack? Cade asked with her brows raised. Look, he's not a good person. You shouldn't feel so bad for him. He feels bad for no one but himself. If you want to help someone like him, you can't do it by being gentle. His kind just views that as weakness, and it goes in from one ear and out the other. Ah, all right, Aurelius said, looking at his feet. You're trying to help him, then. I'm being the leader of this group. Part of that is being harsh enough to make sure even the slackers do their part properly. So, no, I'm not trying to help him. I'm just making him work. You can help him if you want to, but you'll have to earn his respect before you're able to. How do I do that? Aurelius asked as he kicked some small rocks on the concrete platform they walked on. It's simple, Cade answered, her firm gaze forward. Be better. Chapter 16. Easy killing. Oh, Cade, it's so good to see you. A woman who looked about 50 years old came to greet Aurelius and Cade after they knocked on the door of the orphanage building. It was a large stone building that looked more like an academy than an orphanage. The place must have housed hundreds of children. Finally, it made sense why Cade was helping with the funding so actively. It's good to see you too, Freya, Cade said, her voice higher than usual. Then the pair embraced each other. Aurelius was a bit surprised at how warm Cade acted so suddenly. Cade had worn a warmer expression the whole few hours that they traveled to get there, though, so it wasn't that surprising. Everyone needed someone special in their lives that they could show affection to. Gabriel's words. Freya then turned her bright eyes to Aurelius. There was a sudden curiosity in those dark green orbs of hers. A wide grin grew on her face as she looked back at Cade. You go, Freya shrieked like she was about to implode. Cade shook her head profusely and used a deep voice to make things clear. No, no, oh, I knew it, Freya said with a gasp. And look at him, he's so tall, I bet he's Stro. It seemed like Cade almost shoved her palm inside the woman's mouth completely. She then looked at Aurelius, who was nervously chuckling at the side. He just wanted to go practice materialization somewhere quiet, but now he had imaginary daggers threatening to pierce his soul. Cade then looked the woman in the eyes. He's 16, and I'm not like that, so would you shut up? I'm too tired for this right now. The woman raised her hands and mumbled something into the palm pressed against her mouth. By that time, Aurelius had performed a vanishing trick. Cade heaved a sigh before putting on a serious expression as she let go of Freya. Freya settled down as well, and her gaze got firm. What have you got for me? A few hundred gold, Cade answered without hesitation. Freya's eyes went wide, and it seemed like she was going to yell something when she leaned in and whispered, What did you do? I can't take that amount. I sold some enhancers. And you're going to take the money. It's untraceable, I assure you. Hide it somewhere safe, Cade responded without worry. Enhancers, Freya said aversely, but fortunately she didn't start a lecture. But what do I spend it on? I already have enough saved up to provide the kids with all the necessities for years to come, thanks to you. What do you want me to do? Provide it for more years to come. And for better education, give the kids the opportunities they should have. And if there's still money left over, give it to others in need. Fine, but you should stop endangering yourself like this. We already have enough. Yeah, well, I'll think about it. But my duty is to keep this place standing, and I'll do so until my dying breath, Cade said, determination in her eyes. You never know when that's going to be, so it's better for you to have too much than too little. Despite looking for a quiet spot, Aurelius found himself interacting with some of the kids, who were really interested in pulling out strands of his hair. It was fun before there were tens of kids there, all pulling at his hair. After that, it turned into some type of tag game. However, against Aurelius' wishes, they didn't stay at the orphanage for long. Cade gave Freya the banknotes, and they left. They proceeded to continue their travels through the night in roughly the direction they had come from. As the sun started to rise, they finally arrived. What is this place? Aurelius asked as he looked at the building before him. The house was seemingly 2 stories high and had pristine white walls and sharp architecture. The door was dark wood, and the windows were so finely made that one wouldn't even have known they were there if not for the light being reflected off of them. It's my friend's house, Cade answered. Aurelius looked at Cade confusedly. He didn't even have to say anything before she answered. She's also from the orphanage. How did she afford this house, then? She's smart, and she doesn't give up, Cade explained as she took out a hidden key. And she happens to be a criminal. She opened the door. It was the finest house Aurelius had ever seen. The floors were clean to the point of mirroring the sunlight that shone through the windows. There's a guest room upstairs. Go get some sleep, Cade said. What about you? Aren't you a guest, too? Aurelius asked as Cade walked away. I've got my own room, she said over her shoulder. For some reason, Aurelius wasn't tired. He tried to sleep for a while but gave up, deciding to head into the backyard instead. There he had his hands together with a thin, ethereal object in front of him. Materialization worked in odd ways. Supposedly, like all essence usage types, it had its own rules and regulations, but it was still a mess in Aurelius' eyes. He had started practicing it ever since he heard about it from Cade, but he hadn't made much progress since he had poured most of his attention into motionless magic. Not that that was going any better. Sometimes he wondered if he really had any talent. Things seemed to blow up in his face when he believed in them the most. He also couldn't help but wonder why he wasn't taught sooner. If someone had told him about essence, he would probably be on Cade's level by now. 12 years had been completely wasted. The imaginary mass crumbled and faded. Aurelius couldn't grasp it. He grunted and pumped his fist with the intent to hit something, but stopped midway and just let it go, shaking his head. You really take your practice seriously. Aurelius turned to Cade, who sat down beside him on a fully ethereal chair, made with no setups or anything. TCH. Yeah, just rub it in, Aurelius said, shifting his gaze. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, Cade apologized. Aurelius wasn't sure about the authenticity of her words, though. There was rarely any variation in her tone. I was just saying. You don't get emotional about much outside of essence. Why is that? Is it really that important to you that you can't focus on anything else? Yes, it is. At least, I like to think that way. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing enough. Of course, I care about other stuff, but I think strength is the key to it all. For example, how can I save anyone if I'm not strong? The key to everything, huh? You know, people who say that rarely think what it all entails. What about when you are finally strong enough? What will you do? Who will you save? How will you save them? Kate asked and waited a little for an answer. A couple seconds passed before she continued. It's frighteningly common for people to chase one thing and one thing only without really thinking farther. It seems absurd, but I think it has something to do with how humans are fundamentally wired. We always want to be chasing something. Always something better. It doesn't even matter if that thing exists. We do it anyway. Even I, despite my consciousness of the matter, do it to an extent. Ah, right, Aurelius responded, scratching his head. Kate sighed and stood up, the chair vanishing. She walked forward and began to speak with her back to Aurelius as she looked to the sky. Do you see me as a monster? She asked. Aurelius furrowed his brows. Oh, no. Of course not, he said, stumbling over his words. You're just saying that because I'm teaching you, right? Kate said with a light chuckle. Aurelius put his hand on the seat of his chair. No, you just want to help the people at the orphanage, so how is that bad? You're doing what you can to better the world. Aurelius, tell me, have you ever killed anyone? Her tone was deeper. I've killed some animals. And that beast, too. No, have you ever killed a person? A living, breathing human being? Aurelius shrunk. No, never. Do you think you will? I hope not. But if it's necessary, I'll do it. Aurelius said. I don't know if you should. There are things in this world that no one should experience. Killing is one of them. How horrible is it? That's the thing. Kate turned to look Aurelius in the eyes. It's not. Aurelius leaned back and let out a mumble mixed with an exhalation. What? It's addicting. When you take the life of a horrible person and put out the light in them, you know that person will never hurt anyone again. It's so easy and rewarding. It's something like a drug. You do it, and suddenly there's an indescribable satisfaction. But afterward, you feel dirty. And that's dirt that doesn't wash off. It's dirt on your soul. Aurelius' mouth was dry, like it was filled with sand. But you're doing the right thing, aren't you? Kate squatted down and dug her nails into the dirt, shifting her gaze to the ground. No, not the right thing. Maybe the right intention, but not the right thing. Taking a life is never something virtuous. It carries an aura of negativity, no matter what. Aurelius gulped and licked the dry inside his mouth. How do you do it, then? How do you deal with it? I just do it. I don't think about it much. It's just commands I make to my body, and my body does the killing. Then I go on to look people in the eyes, and sometimes they don't look human. They seem like simple animals. Like walking bags of meat. Something you'd find in a butchery that has, for some reason, gained consciousness. Then I can't help but think of how easy it would be to just kill them. I think about it all the time. Kate stood back up and let the dirt in his hand slip through his fingers. The dirt was dry and flowed like sand. I have dreams about it. All the time, I can't get it out of my head. Sometimes I wake up and I want to hurt myself. I'm not sure that I deserve to live. Kate looked to Aurelius. He had been holding his breath and only exhaled after she finished. However, he couldn't get a word out. Kate looked down. Aurelius could recognize regret in her eyes. He also noticed something for the first time. The underneaths of Kate's eyes were sagging. Had they always been like that? The orphanage helped, though, Kate said, looking at the building on their side. After my mother died, I kind of just wandered around. Freya took me in. Things have been rough. Not enough food or water. I had a chance to help. The people at the orphanage gave me a chance to provide something to this world. Kate looked to Aurelius. She pursed her lips and rubbed her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to just dump all of this on you. It's nothing, Aurelius finally managed to say. I'll stop bothering your practice now. Kate turned toward the house in order to head back inside. Then she stopped to say, Aurelius, I'm not sure how you'll be forced to handle things in the future, and I'm not saying my judgment of myself will apply to you if you ever do kill a person. Just don't become like me. Okay. Aurelius said, scratching his arm and blinking irregularly. Then he caused Cade to stop. Wait, Cade, I don't think you should suffer. So please, don't hurt yourself. Cade turned back and smiled faintly before going inside. Chapter 17, Preparations. House Borlo, Balgair read out loud, reportedly has no connections to Newman on the basis of their decline. He flipped through other notes of his, but there was not much he could find on House Borlo specifically. He had studied all the most important houses in Mercrest and even those outside of Mercrest to complete his data, but there wasn't much to be found. So, the house is going to shit and Newman doesn't care to help since they would rather have another house rise to fill the spot and just form a connection with them. Balgair voiced his thoughts to nobody. The room of the inn was empty enough for it to have a bit of an echo despite its lack of size. Then Balgair was just hearing things. He sighed and leaned his head back over the backrest of his chair. I doubt I'll need to read through history for this, though. Borlo was established when Newman was founded and began its decline before Newman began expanding all over during these past years. As weird as the sudden expansion is, it works out. And since the banks are charged outrageously for the protection of large assets in this current economy, Borlo most likely has a safe of their own, he thought. Well, I guess that's that. Time to go see what that place looks like. The Borlo mansion was located southeast of the slums on the northmost border of Mercrest and took 2 days of travel. Balgair had left straight away since he was in a bit of a hurry, and even after all the wait, the sight of the mansion did not disappoint. The house may have been on the verge of collapse, but it was still the Borlos. The house was probably still among the 100 richest houses in the nation. The estate was larger than Balgair had expected, and he had expected a lot. It had likely required hundreds of square meters worth of space to be cleared of the trees that tightly packed the surrounding area. On top of that, the whole area was protected by tall, spiky metal fences that allowed one to see the mansion, garden, and the smooth stone path that led to a square-shaped fountain that stood right in front of the mansion. The mansion was highly textured, with pure white walls that seemed smooth, like the work of a sculptor. Balgair walked off the gravel path he was on and started circling the mansion, just far enough to not attract the attention of the guards that stood in pairs at the entrance and all around the mansion. When he reached the side of the mansion, the backyard came into sight. There lay other houses, which, on the other hand, while luxurious when compared to normal houses, were bland brick buildings of a light brown color. Such a noble thing to hide all the ugly, Balgair thought with a yawn and a crack of his neck. He counted 8 buildings in total that seemed to belong to guards and servants. Their size was probably enough to house 40 to 56 people in relatively good conditions. Likely, about half of that number were guards. It wasn't a job Balgair had any business doing on his own. Balgair tapped on his head a few times and started looking through the windows. When all that was resolved, Balgair headed back to the entrance. He entered the gravel path and began walking towards the guards while whistling. The guards turned their heads toward him, and not long after, the gate opened. Out came a man with short brown hair and a face so flat one could have thought he was born with his head under a boulder. Who are you? What are you doing here? Balgair smiled sheepishly and took off his imaginary hat with a nod. I'm with the Rust Bank. I heard you were in need of our services. The man's nose crumpled up. What are you talking about? I've never heard of such a bank. Balgair tilted his head in confusion. We heard you cut ties with your bank and were looking for services from others. My master has done no such thing, and there has been no appointment made by any banker. Leave this place before I make you, the man said, waving Balgair off. Balgair suppressed a smile. What? Please just let me talk to Sir Gaius. The guard was taken aback. Sir Gaius? There is no Sir Gaius here. Oh, please, this is the Gaius mansion, is it not? No, this is the Borlo mansion. Balgair looked around with his mouth wide. Then he gave a low bow. My deepest apologies. I have wasted your time. The guard shoved Balgair, who proceeded to stumble a couple steps. Apology not accepted. Get the hell out of here, you incompetent bastard. Balgair walked a few steps with his upper body crouched down before straightening his posture. He then dug a cigarette out of his pocket, lit it, and inhaled some smoke before scoffing with a grin as his eyes narrowed into slits. What a dumbass. 3 days later, in the dead of night, Balgisar arrived under the bridge with a cigarette tucked in between his lips. After he met Cade's deadpan eyes, he spit the cigarette out and waved at his partners with a smile. How's it going? Aurelius seemed to have fallen asleep on his feet but quickly shook awake after Balgair arrived. Everything is going well. Balgair's smile widened, but his eyes dropped. And I don't give a shit. Aurelius' face dropped. So, how about we get to business? Well, give us the briefing, Kate commanded monotonously. They had probably been waiting for quite some time. Sure, no budget will be needed, although I'd really like to spend your money, Valgair started. I couldn't get any blueprints of the mansion, so I just went to look around the place. I managed to confirm that they are currently associated with a bank, so it is almost certain we'll find banknotes instead of gold. I got a good look at the things. Depending on how accurate my predictions are, the search and cracking the safe will take somewhere from half an hour to 2 hours. If I can't crack it, we will probably be able to take the safe with us if something goes wrong and time runs out. Also, according to my estimation, there are probably about 50 guards and servants. Half and half. Kate put a hand on her chin. 30 to 120 minutes. If we just knock the guards out, we may not even get 10 minutes of peace. Valgair nodded. That's right. Logically, we should just kill them. Aurelius immediately threw his hands to his sides in protest. What? We can't just kill them. They're just doing their job. These people have children. You can't just talk about them like they're puppets. They're human. Their lives have meaning. Valgair leaned his head slightly forward. Yes, they are human. Humans die all the time. What's your proposal here? Wasn't the heist your idea? Are you now suggesting we should half-ass the mission? What point would there be in going there just to leave things unfinished? Can't we knock them out multiple times? Aurelius proposed. Valgair sighed. You really think knocking out people is some kind of miracle substitution for killing? It causes brain damage. Have you even gotten hit in your life? Ever broken a bone? Of course, you haven't. You're a fucking brat. Valgair put a hand forward with his palm facing up. Look, when you knock someone out, you are causing brain damage. That person might never be the same again. In some cases, that's worse than death. And you're suggesting we do that to them multiple times. You know, being knocked out twice in quick succession is almost guaranteed brain damage. Ah, but what if we tie them with hyperwire? Aurelius tried. There are probably more than 20 guards. All of them are essence users. You know how much hyperwire that will take. No matter the cost, it will also be impractical as hell when you consider the amount of time it will take to tie them up coupled with the chances they will all break out, Valgair answered before sighing. Aurelius kept quiet, so Valgair decided to voice some more thoughts. Tell me, Goldilocks, have you ever considered what it means to be a hero? You want to be one, right? Well, let me tell you. A hero isn't someone who's morally righteous. A hero is someone who is capable of letting go of their strict morals and doing what is necessary to change the world for the better. If you really want to do this, you better do it right, or you'll only make things worse for everyone. Aurelius raised a finger. Okay, shut up, both of you, Kate said, digging her ear with her pinky. I'm tired of listening. Here's what we'll do. She took a deep breath before beginning. The first step is to get the Borlo family out of the mansion to make things go smoothly and lessen the amount of guards. You have a plan for that, correct? She looked at Valgair and, who had his hands crossed. After he gave a silent nod, she continued. Then we will go in during the daytime so that we don't raise the suspicions of the surrounding townspeople in case there's noise. We will attack the guards first and incapacitate them all, after which we will take the servants captive. We will put them all in one place, which I and Aurelius will watch over as you go for the safe. We will make sure nobody escapes to alert others or try to come for you. After you crack the safe, we will leave in different directions and meet up here. Valgair grinned. You got a lot of trust in me. Kate chuckled. I'm the one who will be taking the money. Valgair's face dropped. Oh, right. By the way, you know a guy who can exchange banknotes for gold, right? Kate asked Valgair. Yup, I know one. He takes a 10% cut, but he's untraceable and trustworthy. I don't think you have any better options, either. It's rare to find a criminal who has the status to exchange 50s and 100s without suspicion. Kate nodded. That's good. Aurelius raised a hand, and only after Kate and Valgair put their attentions on him did he open his mouth. What about disguises? Valgair raised his chin. Ah, right, we have that hair of yours to worry about. Somebody sees it, and we're fucked. Nobody has that colored hair in these parts, so you'll be an easy guy to identify by just that one feature. Kate dug at her teeth with her tongue before butting into the conversation. Let's just get some cheap dark clothes, accompanied by balaclavas and masks. That will be enough. We can buy those on our way, Valgair said, and an amused smile grew on his face. Now let's go. We have a mansion to rob. Goldilocks, boy-looking girl, and good old me. Can't wait to see how this will go to shit. Chapter 18. The Heist 1. Sir Borlo, a letter came in. A young guard came rushing inside the mansion's dining hall with a letter in hand. Another older guard with short black hair and a thin mustache snorted. Better be an important letter for you to disturb us like this. The guard shook and turned to the guard with a bow. Commander, I was told it is from the president. The plumpy man called Sir Borlo furrowed his brows and raised his hand. Give it. The young guard was quick to run up to the master and hand him the letter. Sir Borlo then waved for the guard to leave before opening it. His brown eyes quickly jumped through the letter before he put it down and looked at the commander. The Borlos are to greet the president in town in an hour. It appears the president has begun his tour through Mercrest early this year. The commander took a sip from his cup. He's starting with Boria, and such short notice. Odd, isn't it? The president is an odd man. Also, perhaps he wanted to spare us the preparations, knowing of our current financial situation. He is known to be courteous, is he not? You may be right. Are we all to leave? I don't think that's a good idea. The signature on the letter seems authentic, but in the event that it is a trick of some sort, I will take my family and a dozen servants and guards with me to the town. You stay here and guard the mansion, Sir Borlo said, standing up. Just as he was about to leave, however, he turned to ask, you have that with you, right? The commander flashed a smile and dug out of his pocket a vial with a black substance in it. You mean this? Oh, don't worry, nobody is going to break into this place. They're leaving, Valgair said as he leaned to the side from behind a wide tree with his gaze on a pristine carriage. On the sides of the carriage, there were a few men in robes with a circular symbol sewed into the chest area. Let's wait a few minutes before we move. Okay, I'll go in first, Kate said. After I get rid of the guards at the gate, you and Aurelius head in from the sides. Deal with the guards inside. In the meantime, I'll round up the servants and restrain them. Aurelius and Valgair nodded, putting their balaclavas and masks on. Kate walked past the pair, dragging both of their hoods over their heads before putting her own hood on as well. She then got moving, changing positions to a better one for the ambush. Valgair waited a bit before he went right after her, leaving Aurelius alone on one side of the mansion while he traveled to the other side. As he did so, however, he had to cross the path the carriage went along. As he got out of the cover of the trees, the guards finally noticed his movements and were probably about to open the gate and give chase when suddenly Kate jumped behind them and briefly dealt with them. Valgair looked on with a smile, and Kate simply nodded back as thanks for the distraction. She then disappeared from sight as Valgair ran into the other side of the forest and went around before arriving at the other side of the mansion. That's when he started hearing yells from Aurelius' side. That idiot went in too soon, he thought, clenching his fists before jumping over the metal spikes of the metal fence. Aurelius had made it into the entrance hall of the mansion. It was a fine area filled with paintings and illuminated by a large crystal lamp hanging from the ceiling. There were 2 staircases on the sides, both leading up to the second floor. It seemed a bit impractical, but Aurelius didn't have time to worry about that while he was under attack. Aurelius dove and grabbed the hand of the guard that had attacked him before turning on his axis and throwing the man across the room. The man flew through the air before clashing with the stone wall. His reinforced body and momentum managed to make a small crater and send small rocks flying. Aurelius couldn't rest for even a moment, though, as immediately afterward, another guard let out a yell and aimed an ethereal blade at his neck. Aurelius didn't have enough time to make a shield, so he tried his best to evade the blade. He got as far away from the blade as he could, narrowly managing to dodge the strike, and no blood dripped onto the already crimson carpets of the mansion. However, it felt as though his mask and balaclava were damaged. Aurelius wasn't sure, though, and didn't have time to check. After the guard withdrew the blade, Aurelius took his chance and jumped in. The guard was faster than expected, though, and managed to create enough distance to not be reached by Aurelius. He then swung his blade wildly twice in diagonal patterns. Aurelius didn't feel much and jumped back, but then a cold feeling came from his left hand. He looked down. The area between his middle and index fingers had been cut in half by a few centimeters. As soon as he saw it, the pain began. First, it stung, then it felt like it was on fire. Like a wildfire was burning in his hand, threatening to spread to other parts of his body. Aurelius breathed through his locked teeth, trying to calm his rapid heartbeat, and wrapped his left hand with his right, putting pressure on the wound. Then he fell back as the blade swept across his face, only slightly missing his eyes. He let go of his hand as he fell to the ground in order to jump back up with the help of both his hands, despite the pain. He successfully managed to get to his feet before the guard could get on top of him. However, as he was about to grab the guard, the other guard came back into the fight, launching at him like an animal. Aurelius pushed the guard with the blade back before quickly turning his attention to the guard rushing at him. He then simply brought his hands up before swiftly and forcefully bringing them down on the guard like a hammer at the exact time the guard was about to hit him. His target was hit and collapsed onto the floor at his feet. It was then that the guard with the blade managed to come back with a powerful swipe of his blade. Just as Aurelius was about to back away, however, his ankle was grabbed by the man he had knocked down. Aurelius looked down in surprise, but he knew it. He had held back. It was no wonder the man was conscious. The best Aurelius could manage in the short time he had was to lean back. It wasn't enough. The blade cut him diagonally from the navel to his right side hip. It felt like it went through the bone. Aurelius cried out as he fell back, his ankle still in the grounded guard's grip. The guard aimed his blade downward as Aurelius put his hands together, creating a wall with his fingers. A shield was supposed to come into reality, but it didn't. Maybe it was the blood pouring out of his left hand onto his chest. Maybe it was because he deserved to die. Then the blade was brought down on his stomach. It had no power in it any longer by the time it reached him, though. All the force was zapped as soon as a vacuum sound resounded and in rough, aquatic beam if essence blew a hole into the guard's chest. The blade disappeared and the guard fell limply onto Aurelius, all the vessels of blood severed in his chest pouring their contents onto him. Bile rose up in Aurelius' throat and tears grew onto the edge of his eyes as the corpse weighed on him and the smell of rust spread like it was rushing to infect every corner of the world. He felt like shoving the corpse away and turning to run away, but he couldn't. Not a single muscle would listen to him. Cade's rounding up the servants. She took the guards I handled at the side entrance. Apparently, the ones you handled were gone by the time she got there. You held back, didn't you? Bah, Balgair, you, arg, what's this? Balgair asked as he walked up to Aurelius and looked to his side. You held back again, when will you learn? There was a small whining noise that intensified for a split second as Balgair delivered a kick to the other guard's face. Now then, I have to start searching for the safe. Are there any more guards in this place? We've already taken care of 8, Balgair asked, watching with his hands in his pockets as Aurelius lay underneath the corpse he created just now. You. Aurelius calmed his uneven breathing and stumbled around his words as his eyes stung. Where? He gulped. Where is Cade? She's rounding up the servants and other guards, making sure nobody blows the horn, Balgair answered, his tone sounding unusually soft. He just didn't care. At all. Aurelius breathed through his teeth as his upper lip, nose, and brows twitched. You killed him. Balgair looked at the corpse beneath him and scoffed. I saved your life. Show some gratitude. He took the corpse by the back of his neck and threw him aside. Some blood came out of the man's mouth, falling onto the ground and splashing onto Aurelius' face in the process. Balgair then looked down at Aurelius, whose body was tight like a stone. Get your ass up, you useless moralizer. If I had restrained that guard before Balgair got here, if I wasn't so weak, that person would be alive. Aurelius slowly sat up and raised himself to his feet, holding his left hand tightly. Balgair is right. He saved me. Because I needed saving, the guard died. It's my fault. My sin is weakness. After he got up, both their attentions were directed to a man upstairs with his elbows leaned on the handrail. The man had a thin mustache and short black hair, which complemented his tight facial features. He looked down with his brows furrowed and his mouth opened weirdly, which made his expression seem to be one of disgust or signaled that he was utterly unimpressed. The man wore a guard's uniform, but the circular symbol on his uniform was sewn with a golden color instead of the plain white the other guards had. Aurelius let go of his left hand and clenched both his hands into fists as he looked up. The guard then opened his mouth. Right when I finally got some sleep. He squeezed the stone railing so hard there was a crack. Now tell me, who are you, and what do you want on your gravestones? Chapter 19. The Heist 2. There was a moment of silence during which Balgair looked down at the guards at his feet before looking up at the man upstairs. Sorry, I didn't hear you just now. How about you come down so we can talk? Without seemingly a single doubt, the guard jumped down, smoothly hopping over the railing on the second floor. He took the impact well as he hit the ground and dusted his clothes off a little. So you're here to rob the place? The president's letter a part of your plan? Yes and yes, Balgair answered, making loose wiping gestures with his hand as Aurelius watched, unsure if he should stop Balgair from revealing information. What about you? You in command of this bunch? I am, and I really don't like people coming over here to put holes in my men, the commander of the guard said as his eye color deepened as he enhanced his senses motionlessly. I think that's enough talking. Balgair walked forward in front of Aurelius and popped his neck before taking a relaxed stance with a focused look in his eyes. Yeah, let's do this. I was getting bored, too. Then he gestured for Aurelius to step forward. Keep up or die. Aurelius' essence supplies had run out, so he had to perform a couple of setups. Reinforcement and double enhancement all at the same time. They had no time to waste. Aurelius walked to Balgair's side and exhaled as he lowered himself into a battle stance. The commander snorted. Then there was a sound of the floor cracking under sudden, tremendous pressure. In the next moment, the commander was between Balgair and Aurelius. They attacked at the same time, while the commander focused on one side, pushing Balgair away while evading Aurelius' reach. Balgair received the push well and managed to stay on his feet, but knocked up a bit of dust in the process. Aurelius, on the other hand, had missed with his first strike and wasn't quite ready for the commander to lean his upper body in Balgair's direction, aligning with his earlier momentum from the push, before raising and extending his foot into Aurelius' wound located in his midsection. Aurelius cried out shortly before grunting and regaining his balance. He saw Balgair attack just as he recovered and did the same. Obviously, their speed of recovery was surprising, as the commander stumbled into his stance before just barely dodging Balgair's punch. That wasn't enough, however, as right after, it was Aurelius's first to dug into the commander's ribs. The hit was perfect, but the commander seemed barely affected. Sure, he went back enough to create space for a moment of peace, but not enough. Did I sprain my wrist? Aurelius thought while shaking his right hand. He didn't remember having hit something that felt so hard, even while his body was enhanced and reinforced. Balgair turned to him with a wild movement, like he was going to launch at him. What the hell was that? You had a perfect opportunity. Why isn't he dead? Balgair spoke with a voice so loud he was almost yelling and pointed at the commander. What do you mean? You could have killed him. Why didn't you? Balgair asked, like he was offended somehow. What? I hit him as hard as I could. You overestimate how strong I am, Aurelius answered with a rare annoyance at Balgair's unfounded constant expectations. Balgair turned back to their enemy. TCH, I know you can hit harder than that. It's like you have an unconscious safeguard in your mind so that you don't hurt anyone a little too badly. You done quarreling, kids? The commander asked. Good, let's get back to it then. Again, he launched forward. This time, the ground was not scathed. He had lost a bit of his explosiveness. Aurelius and Balgair moved farther apart in order to surround the commander. They then attacked from both sides, Aurelius with punches and Balgair with whatever he could come up with. This time, the commander wasn't in the business of countering, though. He simply slapped away punches and attempted to grab him as he evaded the kicks Balgair threw. Is he trying to tire us out? Aurelius wondered. No, he's waiting to counter when a good chance comes. But there will be nothing like that if we keep this up. There's no way he can throw a powerful counter without exposing himself. Aurelius looked at Balgair, and his eyes flew wide as the joints in his neck flexed. The commander knows that. He's waiting for one of us to lower our guard before delivering a significant hit, without caring if he receives damage in the process. Aurelius opened his mouth. Dawn. That was when the commander took his chance. Balgair, despite his carefulness, had gotten a little too used to attacking without suffering counterattacks. The commander dodged a punch from him before twisting his waist and delivering a precise kick straight into the side of Balgair's head. Aurelius screamed out as he watched Balgair's body get tense. Balgair collapsed onto the carpet, and in the next moment, his cheek was pressing against the floor, and thick blood flowed out of his mouth. He was still moving, though, his nails clawing at the carpet. The commander didn't have the chance to regain his balance before Aurelius took him by the back of his neck and slammed his face into the ground hard enough for a small depression to form. The commander had trusted in his chances to survive whatever damage he received as a result of exposing himself to a powerful counter. Then it would be one-on-one. Aurelius couldn't let that happen. Aurelius pressed the commander onto the ground, but he still managed to roll over so that he was facing Aurelius. He reached up. Aurelius slapped his hand away. He removed the hold he had on the commander's head, pinning his hand instead. Then he kneeled, pinning the commander's only remaining hand. He angled his elbow and hit the commander. The commander had to go to sleep. He wouldn't stop hitting him until he did. The sound of his elbow hitting the commander's cheek echoed throughout the room and resounded in Aurelius' ears. As the commander's wriggling started to stop, the sound got more hollow. After a dozen hits, the sound seemed to disappear. Then the commander wriggled for one last time before there was an impact on the back of Aurelius' head. Somehow, the commander had gotten enough space to move and momentum to throw and land a kick. A nice strategy. Aurelius' face loosened as he fell backwards. Before the commander could enact his revenge, Balgair's shin found its way to his stomach. The commander launched backwards, body parts scraping against the floor as he tumbled. He hit the wall fairly gently, since most of his momentum had been lost. Aurelius struggled to support himself with his hands and get himself upright. Balgair didn't seem to be doing much better. He seemed to be something like half-conscious. The commander chuckled, drawing Aurelius' attention. "Didn't think I'd have to use it against some lousy robbers," he slurred his words as blood flowed out of his mouth along his lower lip and chin, dripping onto the golden-colored symbol on his chest. Aurelius quickly started to come back to his senses as his mind figured out the meaning behind the commander's words. His fears proved true when the commander pulled a vial out of his pocket and popped it open before hastily gulping it down. Balgair took a step back as the commander started twitching. Enhancer. CA, we need help. Come over here, now." Aurelius stood up and stumbled a few steps before gaining balance. He contemplated which direction he should go. Try to face the commander or try to escape. Death everywhere. The commander laughed out loud before he slammed the side of his fist into the wall. It was a single attack with no momentum behind it, breaking the stone apart like glass. He tensed up as the veins in his face showed themselves for a moment before going back to normal. He then pressed his back against the wall as he pushed himself up with his feet in a slow effort. Then he looked down at his hands, pumping them into fists. Finally, he pushed himself off the wall and shook his feet and body. "I expected a lot, but nothing quite like this," the commander said, excitement and awe in his voice as he breathed deeply, his frame seeming larger than before. Aurelius and Balgair stood still, too afraid to turn their backs. They stood there in suspense, hoping Kate had heard and would arrive shortly. "You have another helper, huh? I'll just go kill him right after I'm done with you," the commander said, flashing a devilish smile before launching at Balgair. Balgair couldn't react before the commander had his neck. "You die first." He was going to break his neck. Aurelius rushed toward the pair with a scream from the core of his being before slamming himself into the commander. It was all the power he had, but the commander was barely fazed. He managed to create some distance with the push, but not enough to escape. He had to go forward. The commander and Aurelius launched at each other with screams that reflected opposites in battle. The world seemed to shift, and the tides of wind caused by rapid movement disappeared for a moment, as if fleeing due to not being able to fathom the two individuals. Aurelius and the commander clashed with all the power each had. To Aurelius, it didn't feel like much. The effort was hollow rage. He just did it by doing it. It felt silent. There was something scraping against the back of Aurelius' forearm. Was it the commander's spine? Aurelius pulled away. There was a hole in the commander's stomach that leaked blood and something else. Aurelius wasn't sure, and he didn't want to know, but he couldn't look away. The commander's legs gave out as the excitement in his eyes turned into nothingness. He fell forward into a ready pool of blood. As he lay on the ground, he was still moving. Aurelius wanted to crouch down. He wanted to run. He wanted to rip off that filthy hand of his. Burn it. Burn it all. Turn and forget everything. None of it should have existed. Aurelius touched the side of his face. Wet. He looked at his fingers. Blood. Apparently, the commander had landed something as well. Nothing much. Aurelius clenched his jaw. He turned to Balgair, who was holding his throat with his body curled up. He blinked his wide eyes a few times before gulping. Aurelius opened his mouth, gesturing lazily while putting pressure on the wound on his side. "Go start the search." Balgair nodded and ran upstairs, obeying without a single moment's notice. Aurelius looked back at the commander. He had dug out a picture from his pocket. Aurelius then felt his emotions drown as he saw the text on the back of the paper. Happy Father's Day to the best dad in the world. Chapter 20. The Heist 3. CA, we need help. Come over here, now. Balgair's screams reached all the way to the area behind the mansion, where Kate had gathered all the fearful servants and unconscious guards. Kate's jaw tightened, and she turned immediately after the screams traveled to her ears. She hesitated for a moment before facing the servants and saying with a deep voice, "If even one of you moves, you all die." She then proceeded to cross the few hundred-meter distance, with every step creating depressions in the ground. What could it be? Why would they need help? She thought as she came closer and closer to the mansion. Then, instead of going around, she loaded up power into her legs and jumped over the entire building, barely touching the roof. When she came back down, her momentum carried her a couple tens of meters forward, despite her feet scraping on the ground. The bottoms of his shoes probably lost a centimeter or two in the process. After managing to stop in place, she turned around, her hood coming off. The mansion doors were open, but there were no noises that suggested an ongoing fight. Cade lunged right in with a single thought. Please be alive. Her feet scraped against the red carpet in the entrance hall of the mansion as her eyes jumped around, finding what she was looking for in an instant. Her companion was on his knees, his hands and head hanging limply, a puddle of blood underneath him. Ray, she yelled as she rushed to his side. She raised his head in order to see his eyes. What she saw was not something she had expected to see yet in many years to come. The vibrancy in his eyes had been wiped away. She froze for a second or two. Aurelius didn't let out a single sound, and it didn't seem like he had anything he wanted to say. It looked like he wanted nothing. They were the eyes expected to be seen when gazing into the eyes of an old man on his deathbed, with his faulty memory having wiped any notion of life from his world. Cade turned her head to the side. There were two men lying close together, one seemingly temporarily unconscious, the other permanently so, with a hole in his chest. It had been the lengthened compression that killed him. But the edge of the wound seemed rough. The work of an amateur. It had been Balgair. Cade turned to the only other remaining victim. He had his eyes still open, looking at his hand like he was holding something invisible there. He had a hole in his torso as well, and naturally, he lay in a puddle of blood like the others. However, there was something in the blood. Something black. The guard used an enhancer. Cade realized. That's why Balgair called for help. She took a look at the wound in the guard's stomach area. It was also rough around the edges, but the shape was irregular. She looked at Aurelius' right forearm, which had not a single spot that wasn't covered in blood. Her face went loose before a frown formed. Ray, look at me, she said as he looked into the eyes of Aurelius, who seemed to look through her and through everything else. She shook Aurelius slightly, but his expression didn't change. She snorted and slapped Aurelius so hard that the sound echoed in the hall and probably outside as well. Aurelius' body leaned to the side. He would have fallen over if Cade hadn't kept him upright. However, Aurelius' expression hadn't changed. The only change was that the red mark appeared in an instant. She looked at him and pursed her lips before slapping him again and again. His cheeks turned dark red fairly quickly, but she didn't stop. Instead, she increased the power with each slap. It continued for almost a minute when Aurelius' expression broke. His eyes narrowed as tears built up. His lower lip shook profusely as the corners of his mouth twitched downward. He leaned his body to the side, wanting to lay down. Cade held him still. He started to slap and claw at her hands, but she didn't let go. Ray, calm down, breathe, Cade said softly. No, Aurelius whispered as tears streamed down his cheeks. Don't touch me, he said, cracks in his voice. Cade frowned. Please, Ray, we can't do this now. We have to get out. No, Aurelius burst out, pushing Cade back hard enough to collapse her balance and make her fall onto her back. Cade got up immediately with her head tilted, concern written all over her eyes. What is it? This isn't all because you killed him, right? What happened? Aurelius averted his eyes, looking down at his left side. He picked up something. His left hand had a bad cut on it, which Cade only noticed now. He then handed Cade a pocket-sized piece of paper with dried blood on it. Cade looked down at it with horror. On the piece of paper, there was a pair of tall stick figures. One had long strands of noodle-like hair, and the other had short, spiky hair. In between the two stick figures, there was a smaller stick figure with long hair and a wide smile. Cade breathed deeply through her nose for a while before she saw through the paper that there was writing on the other side. She flipped the piece of paper, and her horror grew. On the paper was a short message made with clumsy handwriting, "Happy Father's Day to the best dad in the world." Cade looked up at Aurelius, whose tears seemed to have no end. Furthermore, he was covering his mouth with his bloody left hand while his body convulsed like he would throw up at any second. Cade shook her head slowly as she bit down on her lips. After a bit of thought, she moved and not long after, Aurelius was in her arms, knocked out. Her gaze hardened as she looked upstairs. Just a bit more, and it'll be over. The safe was nowhere to be found. Kate and Balgair had searched everywhere. Behind every painting, in every closet, and under every desk. "Our time's running out," Balgair said solemnly as he started feeling hopeless. "What do you want to do?" Kate turned around and looked at him. She had her balaclava on, but he could imagine what her expression must have looked like just from the painful look in her eyes. "I don't know. We can't let it all be for nothing. I tied Aurelius with hyperwire, but I'm afraid he'll hurt himself if he regains consciousness while we're still here. Let's keep looking for a while longer. If we still can't find it, let's give up and leave." Balgair stomped down, a curse word slipping out, "Shit." Then his mouth and eyes widened. That sound. The floor shouldn't make that kind of sound when stomped on. He looked at the floor of the head office room they were in. Unlike other rooms in the mansion, this one didn't have the normal red carpet. It was a wooden floor with a detachable large carpet with white, red, and gold flowers and other symbols all over it. Balgair turned to Cade, who seemed to have figured out the same thing. Balgair hurriedly walked to the edge of the carpet before lifting it up. And there it was. A square-shaped hatch on the wooden floor. Cade squatted down and opened the hatch with her fingers, and the door to a safe was revealed. Balgair smiled with relief and rolled up his sleeves. Cracking the safe didn't take long. The Borlos had put their trust in their hiding spot for the safe and hadn't seemingly thought much about the safe's security. However, when they got the safe open, they found only a fraction of what they were supposed to. Balgair dug through the safe. "What? There are only 3,000 gold banknotes here. Where's the rest?" Cade looked down with disappointment. "Maybe we overrated their financial situation. No, it can't be this bad. It can't. Let's look for another safe." "Do you think we have the tea?" Cade was saying when the sound of the gates opening came into her ears. Balgair grunted and started shoveling the banknotes into a bag. In the meantime, Cade went down to the first floor. She took a look at the gates and confirmed that her ears hadn't fooled her. She then took the unconscious Aurelius into her arms at the entrance of the mansion before jumping up onto the second floor. Balgair had managed to get all the banknotes into the bag, and he stood up, looking at Cade for advice. Cade exhaled and tried to clear her mind. "I'm going to take Aurelius with me. He needs treatment and can't get it on his own. You can take the banknotes with you. Take them to that guy you know and get them exchanged. We'll meet in 2 days at the bridge, like we planned." Balgair nodded before turning and breaking through the window at the back of the room. Cade jumped after him, and they proceeded to run in opposite directions.